With the memory of that accursed tree of ages and the many sorrow spiders still burned into my heart, we continued south. I knew of some ports to the south that I might take into, and decided I would keep going until I could find, perhaps Adam's Way or Port Carnelian. But before I could find any of that, we heard the shrieking of some sort of monkeys. One of my sailors told me we had entered the Empire of Hands. The soulless baboons were banned from London, and the apes could take your very heart and your very being if you were not careful. I, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of a longing for supplies, decided to put into port here. The flea-bitten mayor greeted me well enough and offered me a chance to sell my soul to him. Naturally, I turned him down. The isle was unexplored by much of the Admiralty, all of the isles that compiled the Empire of Hands. So, I decided to do some exploring. I found the Emperor, the Monkey Emperor's home. I was not allowed into the Wild-Wheeled court. Only those who'd done great business for the monkeys could do such things. There was a place of cannibalistic pirates and treasure hunters. They hated the monkeys, but they were clearly quite mad. They ate the flesh of their own kin, or the flesh of monkeys, and though they spoke with polite tones, they began screaming at me when they thought that my coat-tails was a monkey tail. I visited temple ruins that seemed to hold the secrets of a former empire, but I had no desire to go in. What was monkey history to me? The final island I actually found a small treasure trove, a hot spring. I took a small dip and recovered myself from the terror of the sorrow spiders. I thought of Marina back in London. It must have been at least a month since I had put out. Would she still be waiting for me when I came home, I wonder? I heard giggling in the undergrowth. I reached for my clothes and found nothing. When I looked further, I saw a young girl in a pirate's cap. Though she was a blonde child, she moved with the grace and agility of a monkey, as if this forest was her natural home. I screamed at her to give me back my blasted clothing! I couldn't return to my ship nude. But, nonetheless, she only seemed it was part of her game. She giggled at me, and I had to give chase. She continued to make me play her games. Please? Pretty please? Pretty, pretty, pretty please? I screamed at her at the top of my lungs, begging, and it seemed to satisfy her to some degree. She tossed me a single sock and then ran forward. Well, it would cover at least something, but I needed the rest of my clothes. In a mire and in a muck, I found her. She had crossed on a tiny beam and begged that I do the same. Ugh. This foundling, this little monkey creature, it was testing my nerves. But what was I to do? Raise my hand against a girl? She had done no real harm, save for a few bumps, bruises, and cuts. I put my hands to one side and showed her what it was to be a Z captain, without fear. I had grace and agility on my side, and I did not get myself stained by the muck. Ironically, as she continued setting traps for me, a ravenous baboon jumped out at her. It seemed to have also been caught in one of her traps, for its fur was covered in blood, and it was shrieking at her. Clearly this was not part of the girl's game, for she let out a shriek and fell to the ground. As I could not raise my hand against her, I could not simply let her die, even though she deserved it. I took a rock, placed my hand on one side of the baboon's head, and before he could turn to see what was attacking him, I'd already crushed his brains in. I reached out my hand to the little miss. For a moment she almost seemed to recognize what I was trying to do. She almost reached out to touch it, and humanity fled. She was too far gone into monkeyness. She ventured into the forest again, but this time beckoned I follow her. There was a tiny hut with some treasures strewn about and some ancient clothing articles. Who was she? Nevertheless, I had played with her, and she seemed to be friendly, if nothing else. She gave me a treasure, and I headed off. Without my clothes. The damned girl still thought we were part of the game. There was no way I was getting them back now. What was I to do? Go back after having left? My crew snickered and jeered, and my officers kept a rather embarrassed silence, though I could hear the snarks from behind my door when I slept. Nevertheless, I had come out with treasure and perhaps a new friend. Laugh all you want. I think I got the better end of this deal. I made way to Godfall in the south, and Polythreme. Though it was no safe haven, it would give me fuel and a place to rest while we made our way back to London. I thought that perhaps the mad monks of Godfall, with their drinking and their tale-telling, would give the adventuress her challenge. My Presbyterite adventuress sought death, after all. They would not fight a woman, but directed us, rather uncordially, to Abbey Rock. The sisterhood there. They trained. They fought. They would see to that the adventuress got her death. However, not before... Take a guess. They wanted something from me. Romantic literature from Kanate. I cannot say if it was for their own private enjoyment or if they had some ritual planned, but another thing in my logbook that must be done. I headed to Station 3 with one of the trinkets that I had gathered in Irem, and delivered a coffin to them. Strangely, they let me in. I met the austere acolyte, a woman with pasty, almost gray skin and goggles covering soot-stained clothes. She was quiet and solemn. She didn't seem to give any cares for me, but I demanded that she take the coffin. After all, it was labeled for her station. She took it, and I decided to watch what she was doing. There was a corpse inside, and she removed a hunk of metal from it like a tumor. It was strange. She did it with practiced ease, and this didn't seem to be unnatural. It was almost as if it had grown within the body. The acolyte perhaps gained a bit of respect for me, for she let me watch her shop as she was out. It was no great respect, but on the Z, any friend is important. I put into the salt lines on my way back to London. We were just a hop-skip away, and though my crew were tired, I always saw an opportunity for some good money. I filled the rest of my hull, what little there was to be with all the trinkets I'd had, with Sphinx stone, and headed back to London. Before I could even unload my hull, the man with the one eye and the sharp knife met me at the docks. He had a job for me in Gator's Morn, and at this point, I could use the money. I decided to accept before selling off my Sphinx stone and my other wares that I had come across. To my abject surprise, when I went down to the Wolfstock docks for lunch, I found Marina waiting. Had she been here every day, looking out at the Z for me? She would never admit to such a thing. She, of course, claimed that it was pure coincidence, but I care very little. It was just good to see her. We embraced, we had a meal together, and we spent the night talking. The Lady Deviless from Palmerston. I had her request to think of as well. The brass embassy admitted me when I told them that I knew of her, and gave them her information. They were interested, if nothing else, but devils are not to be trusted. Nevertheless, if she is welcome back, she should be pleased. Is that not all that matters? I finished my business in London and prepared to head out. However, I had neglected a stowaway on my ship. Two, actually. On my way back home, I had stopped at a small island, just a mangrove college. It was a place of ramshackle huts and great bounty like Aestabel, but nothing to write home about. I hadn't even thought of it. However, there was a beautiful young girl. She called herself Mabe's daughter and was looking for her mother. She claimed that she could tune up my engines as good as any of my mechanics, and she was right. So I let her stay on. After all, why not? I've helped everyone else. A few shouldn't be two more. And there was another one. They heard that I had gone to Venderbight frequently. This shady-looking woman, she had a friend in Venderbight, and I had someone who was looking for a friend. Could they be the same person? Perhaps opportunity has beaten a path to my ship's door. Either way, I finished my business in London and said my goodbyes to Marina. It was time to head out onto the Z once again.